Who's ready? Who's ready? Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me? We will chart a new path forward because this is Canada and we decide what happens here.
An extraordinary result in an extraordinary election. The Liberals have pulled off a historic comeback, clinching a rare fourth consecutive term, this time with a new leader at the helm. And after a number of close races came down to the final count today, we can now say the Liberals will form a minority government. Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm David Cochrane, back in Ottawa, where Mark Carney has been elected Prime Minister on a promise to stand up to U.S. President Donald Trump. So now the real work begins. The Power Panel is here to discuss the immense challenge ahead. Plus, the Conservatives secure their best result in decades, winning more than 40% of the vote and growing their seat count. But what happens when their leader loses his seat?
To the millions of people who voted for the Conservative Party and put their hopes and dreams in our vision, thank you. It will be an honor to continue to fight for you and to be a champion of your cause as we go forward.
Just ahead, we'll ask a Conservative MP about the path forward for his party and his leader. We'll also speak to the Liberal who defeated Pierre Poilievre. Meanwhile, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says he will step down after losing his own seat and the party's official status.
Obviously, I know this night is a disappointing night for New Democrats. I know that people are concretely better off because of our work over the last 8 years, and no election result will ever diminish that. So thank you tonight.
And then there is the Bloc Québécois, which lost seats, but with the Liberals falling short of a majority, the Bloc returns to Parliament with some powerful leverage. And one priority, Quebec.
There's no future for oil and gas, at least in Quebec and probably everywhere. And this has to be said and protected.
There's a lot to unpack here the day after the election, and as Mark Carney has secured an electoral mandate of his own. Power and Politics starts right now. First, we're going to take a look at how things have changed across the country. The Liberals picked up 15 seats. The Conservatives picked up 16. The Bloc, they're down 13. And the NDP, boy, they're facing an extinction moment. Losing 17 seats. The Greens lost half their caucus. They're down to 1. Now, in terms of vote share, that's the seat change right there. You can see the Liberals up 15, the Conservatives up 16, the Bloc down 13, and the NDP down 17. Now, vote change, here's where we are. The Liberals surged to 43.7% of the vote, an increase of 11.2%. You look at a number like that, and historically you say, that's a Liberal majority, but it's not. It's a minority due to a number of factors. The Conservatives at 41.3% is the best result since Brian Mulroney was leading the Progressive Conservative Party. Normally, you look at a result like that, and you say, that's a Conservative majority, but it wasn't, for a series of different reasons. It did lead to a lot of change, and one of those changes was in the riding of Carleton. And the Liberal who won that riding, you can see right here. All right, we're gone back to the seat change graphic. We want to get to the riding results. Here we go. This is Carleton. This was the biggest surprise of the night. Bruce Fanjoy, not just winning the riding with a lead of 4,315 votes over the man who at the beginning of the year was an inevitability to become the next Prime Minister of Canada, leading a Conservative government with more than 200 seats. Bruce Fanjoy got more than 50% of the vote in Pierre Poilievre's riding. And Bruce Fanjoy is here with me in the studio. It's good to see you, sir. Congratulations on your win.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
When the stories came out in the final days of the campaign saying Pierre Poilievre was in trouble in his riding, really dumb people like me who host this show said they didn't think it was possible. But now the whole country knows it was. They know your name. When did you realize that you might win this?
I knew it was possible for a long time. I've been working at this for over 2 years, knocked personally on over 15,000 doors, had thousands upon thousands of conversations with voters in Carleton, and I you get a good sense as to the mood of the riding. In that time, Pierre was largely absent, was doing very little in the way of engaging with Carleton. So whereas we were all over the riding and engaging with people, he had other priorities. And people felt taken for granted.
Well, in my experience in covering politics for over the decades now, people kind of understand when the leader needs to be away, right? Because he did have a reputation early, winning in 2004, of a good constituency man. But you've got to build a party, you got to recruit candidates, you got to fundraise. Was it just that, or were there other factors there?
It was a lot of factors. Certainly if you've accomplished things for the riding, or in the case of a leader, accomplished things for the nation. Voters will respect that. But Pierre Poilievre had 20 years of opportunity. 10 of those years were in government, and there's precious little to show for it. People were growing tired of American-style politics that they saw creeping over the border, and Pierre often practiced that type of politics. So we provided a positive alternative, and we were working hard in the riding, and when you do that day in, day out over 2 years, those numbers add up.
I wonder, Carleton it's outside of Ottawa, like the urban core of Ottawa, but it's an Ottawa area riding. The convoy, when it occupied downtown Ottawa, I know Carleton may not have been affected directly by that, but people could have had to commute in there, might have friends in there. Was that a factor in this, do you think? Because, Mr. Poilievre supported them tonally, brought them donuts famously. Was that a factor in that riding?
It's yes, it was, but it was much more than that. It was just the negative, divisive American-style politics that people didn't want anything to do with. But I do know that that subject came up frequently, and frequently amongst people who had voted Conservative in the past. So.
What about one of the other issues? I know it didn't necessarily make a lot of headlines nationally, but there was an interview that Ian Brodie, the former Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, he spoke at the Canada Strong and Free conference here, and he talked about how you could go fast. Pierre Poilievre, if elected, could go fast. I'm reducing the size of the civil service and making big cuts in government, because this is a big civil service town, and I'm sure you have a lot of civil servants in your soon-to-be constituency of Carleton. I mean, was that a factor at the doors?
People weren't specifically referring to Ian Brodie's comments, but
Liberals were circulating that, though, around the Ottawa ridings.
But no, I mean, civil servants, they're smart, they work hard, and they understand that Liberal governments believe in the public service. We require public service to deliver programs to Canadians, and we will respect public servants and make sure that the services that they provide to Canadians are uninterrupted. I mean, we're facing a moment with the U.S. administration, Donald Trump's tariffs, and his hostility towards things like Canada's sovereignty. We need public servants to help our industries and our workers and our families and individual Canadians to weather this storm. So this was not the time to be cutting public servants. It's time to be respecting them and valuing what they bring to Canada.
Mr. Fanjoy, normally in a riding like Carleton, where it is the leader of the opposition, where it is someone who's won multiple and is seen to be as one of the unbeatable members of Parliament, it's often a sacrificial candidate. You'll sometimes see a political staffer, who's just on the ballot and not really out there. You wanted this fight. Like, you weren't just a name on the ballot, you were a presence at the doors, for months and months and months. I've seen it on social media. and it wasn't that typical sort of throwaway campaign, right? Like you went at this and you wanted this fight. Why did you want this so badly?
I felt that we were facing a historic election. I felt that 3 years ago, long before anyone contemplated a second term of Donald Trump.
Because you were the candidate there well before the tide turned, the way
Yes.
when Justin Trudeau left and Mark Carney came in, right?
Yep. No, for me, it was, this was not something I ever planned to be doing. It was something I thought, I believed needed to be done. And it's very hard to find someone to take on a task like challenging a leader like Pierre Poilievre. So I gradually talked myself into it, partly because I couldn't imagine who else would want to do this this task, but. I personally just felt that he needed to be challenged and needed to be someone in Carleton.
So I know you say you always felt you could win this, but I don't think you were winning this seat on day one of this election, right? If had the vote had happened that day, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But as it went on, there started to be noise, and I've heard that there was a single day where you raised $12,000, another single day where 2,200 Liberal votes got ID'd. The war room surged like 30 people to the riding to help you make the closing argument. Was it the advance poll period where you kind of knew you had a real shot there? Because it seems like you did very well there. And then with the end support and surge and resources, you just locked it down?
It began long before that.
Yeah?
Long before that. We've been building a foundation. The number of people that believed in this campaign were joining this campaign. We're creating the conditions for what was to come. And when the writ dropped, we had in the first week we had over 500 volunteers join the campaign. These were people, ordinary people in our community, most of them from Carleton, many of them from the National Capital Region, and some from further. And it was all people who recognized that this was the most important election of our lifetimes. And in Carleton, we had a unique and remarkable opportunity to choose a better path forward for Canada. So these were ordinary Canadians who had never volunteered for a political party before, went canvassing for the first time, put signs up for the first time, donated for the first time. That's the story, and we couldn't have done it without all of those folks. They made this happen, and I'm extremely proud of them.
Well, Bruce Fanjoy, in all my years covering politics, I've met a lot of people who gave a lot of excuses of why they wouldn't get into the fight until the circumstances were perfect. You are not that person. You took on the tough fight, and you pulled it off. Congratulations on your win in Carleton, and thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you very much.
Good to meet you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so as we were discussing, Liberal Bruce Fanjoy, he beat out Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre for the Carleton riding in Ontario last night. Despite that shock for the party, the Conservatives made several gains, big gains, in Ontario last night, winning 12 more seats in the province compared to the last vote. I'm joined now by one of the winners, by Conservative Scott Aitchison, who was re-elected for a third term in his Ontario riding of Parry Sound Muskoka. Scott Aitchison, it's good to speak to you here on Power and Politics, and congratulations on your win.
Well, thanks for having me, David. It's good to see you.
I'd like to start with where I just ended my conversation with Bruce Fanjoy. What do you make of the fact that despite increasing the vote, despite increasing the seats, your leader lost his own riding last night?
Well, I'll tell you, he's won that riding many, many times. He won it initially when he was 25 years old. And nobody thought he could pull it off because I think it was probably seen that those suburban Ottawa ridings tend to vote Liberal. But Pierre proved that with hard work and commitment, you can pull it off, and he did it a number of times. And I think that he showed the country that too, and he showed an awful lot of candidates in parts of Ontario, for example, that we haven't won in a long time. We took seats in Northern Ontario where he visited lots and lots of times. And so, you know, I've never seen anyone work harder in my life. And for a long time, I didn't know how he did it. I think he lives on espresso, but he's worked hard and gained his seats all over the place in places where we generally don't win. And so, you know, there's been a lot of change and hit the riding at Carleton. And I think that, you know, he served that community well, but he's done so much for our party that he can take a minute and figure out what happens next and how he does that. And I'll be there to support him.
Okay, so he is going to take a minute. Certainly when he gave his speech last night, Mr. Aitchison, he might have known, I'm assuming he probably knew the trajectory that was playing out in his own riding, but I don't think the rest of us did because there's the 91 names on the ballot and all of the advance voting still needing to be counted. But he has no seat right now, so he's no longer the leader of the opposition. He is still the leader of the Conservative Party. There's been a lot of noise about members of the caucus just re-elected, potentially giving up their seat for him. What do you think will happen here? Do you think Pierre Poilievre will stay on as leader and seek entry to the House of Commons in a by-election, or is there some other path here?
Well, I'll tell you what I want him to do, and I want to make sure that he continues on as our leader, and how that occurs and, you know, what they do to make that happen, we'll see soon enough. That's his decision, and I'll give him time to make that decision. But we need Pierre to keep going. He's grown our movement. He's engaged young people in a way that I haven't seen in a generation probably. We increased voter turnout. It's amazing what he's done. Not the result we wanted last night, but a step in the right direction. I think he will be the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Well, but Scott Aitchison, I wonder how strong do you think the support is inside the caucus? And, you know, look, obviously successful in vote share, successful in seat count. A failure to deliver on the promise of a majority that was certainly there when Parliament rose for the Christmas holidays and before former Prime Minister Trudeau stepped down. But a good result for Mr. Poilievre. But, you know, I don't need to tell you, your caucus, you kind of lead the league in regicide, right? It's one and done for a leader if they don't win, and this is one. What is your sense on whether or not Mr. Poilievre will also be done?
Oh, I think caucus support for Pierre is strong and solid, and it should be. You know, he won the leadership of our party convincingly. He's actually improved our numbers. We have a bigger caucus now, thanks to him and his work and his leadership. I think that the idea of, you know, ousting a leader just because they didn't win government, even after making incredible progress like he has, is a dumb idea. We need to build on the progress that Pierre's already made.
So what do you need then to do to build on that progress? Because, you know, you're an Ontario Conservative. I don't need to tell you the side drama that was playing out between the federal Conservatives and the provincial Conservatives in Canada's largest province. There is a similar narrative, but of a smaller scale, playing out in Nova Scotia. There seems to be friction between the federal party and provincial parties in provinces where you had room to grow and needed to grow, even beyond what you were able to do in Ontario in this election. So what do you need to do to build on this?
Well, I think that we need to focus on our jobs going forward. It's not fun to be in the opposition, but we need to continue to be His Majesty's loyal opposition, work with the government when it comes to areas of Canadian sovereignty and dealing with, you know, Donald Trump and these ridiculous on-again, off-again tariffs. I think, as Pierre said last night, you know, we will be united as Canadians in that fight, but we also need to make sure that we're holding the government to account, suggesting improvements where those are available, and opposing where we think the government is wrong. I think we need to keep building on that. We need to continue speaking to Canadians and on behalf of Canadians. I don't think that this minority government's going to last that long, and I think that the more work we continue to do to make sure that life is more affordable for Canadians as well, I think that in a couple of years you could see that, you know, Pierre Poilievre is the next Prime Minister of Canada.
When you say you don't see this minority of parliament lasting that long, I mean, do you measure it in months or do you measure it in like 18 months to 2 years, that sort of thing, which is like the historic length? Because there are going to be conversations starting with Donald Trump as soon as next month, you know, if the public commentary from both sides of the border to be believed, that would seem like a fraught time to try to force another election.
Well, I can't predict how long it will last. It'd be wishful thinking if I told you I hope it doesn't last much longer than a few months. But I've obviously, that's my wishful thinking. I don't know how long it will last. You know, minority parliaments don't generally last that long. This one lasted 3.5 years, this last one, and that's long for minority parliaments. So I think history has taught us that we should be ready to go very quickly.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's going to be a sequel to the supply and confidence agreement. But it does seem at 169 seats a reasonably durable minority as minorities go. But, you know, Mr. Aitchison, just as a couple of final points, there was a big gender gap in what we saw in the polling, that your party struggled with women, in particular older women. And there was a sense in some pools of voters that your party didn't kind of respond strongly enough to the rhetoric of Donald Trump and the threat posed by Donald Trump. Do you think you reacted well enough to what happened in this election coming from the United States as a party? How would you have done it differently if you feel you could have throughout this campaign?
Well, I can certainly tell you about my experience here in Parry Sound, Muskoka, and I would suggest that it is true that I would say, generally speaking, people of the baby boomer generation, particularly women, were, I think, more concerned about Donald Trump and about his rhetoric. And a lot of them told me that they just thought that Mark Carney was more appropriate to deal with Donald Trump than Pierre Poilievre. I think that was there's some truth to that going on across the country. I personally don't agree with that. My sense is that you know, what I learned in the schoolyard was that you need to stand up to bullies, and Pierre Poilievre strikes me as the kind of guy that would just do that. He would stand up to the bully and fight for Canada, just as he's continued to fight for Canada as the leader of the opposition. He was too good as a leader of the opposition, I guess, because thanks to Pierre, you know, there's no Justin Trudeau as prime minister anymore, who was very unpopular. Just thanks to Pierre, the carbon tax has been reduced to zero. He's been incredibly effective. That's the kind of fighter I want, standing up to a bully.
Yeah, he's the knight who slayed his dragon too early in his story, it seems, though, in terms of driving out Justin Trudeau. I just wonder, Mr. Aitchison, as a final point, that you believe Mr. Poilievre is the right person to stand up to Donald Trump. Why do you think it is? So many Canadians, though, the women and the boomer women that you're talking about there, they didn't feel that way because you'd correctly identified the issue set, built this commanding lead in the polls, but when the question became who can best protect us from Donald Trump, the answer was Mark Carney for enough people that he now has a minority government here.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. I've heard over and over again that, you know, part of it was tone, but I honestly, I just think that you know, in the course of that election campaign, you know, we didn't have enough time to convince those that, you know, that voter coalition, that voter group, that Pierre was the right person to stand up to Donald Trump. So I think we have an opportunity now to continue to you know, spread our message, to continue to speak to Canadians, fight for Canada, and demonstrate why the Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre as its leader are the right party to lead this country.
Scott Aitchison, congratulations on your re-election. It was very good to have you on the show, and we hope you come back. Thanks for being here today, sir.
Thanks very much, David.
All right, Conservative MP Scott Aitchison. Okay, all of this, there's a lot to dig into, so we've got the power panel here. Emily Nicola is a columnist for Le Devoir. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, Michelle Cadario is a former Liberal national campaign director, and Kate Harrison is a Conservative political analyst. So exactly how we thought this election would play out,
Yeah,
right? You know, based on all the polling, a massive Conservative surge, but the defeat of their leader and a massive lead in the polls in Ontario for the Liberals that will guarantee a majority. But Michelle, they underperformed in Ontario, and here it is, the third straight Liberal minority. This is a bonkers election in a bonkers year.
Yeah, what a night, what a last few months. And, you know, I think as Liberals, you know, our hopes got sky high. Without question, they were sky high. But to come back down to reality and to remember what January looked like in the polls, what a year ago January looked like in the polls, if anybody had offered us 169 seats, we would have taken that in a heartbeat. And
you'd have sold kidneys to get 169 seats at Christmas.
1,000%.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that the Prime Minister, as a complete rookie on the campaign trail, completely new to politics over the last 3 months, You know, he has come back and he has certainly revived the party, but he also connected with Canadians in a way that I'm not sure anybody else could have as leader. Like, I don't know that there's a scenario for anybody else to have kind of brought the Liberals back to where they are right now. But with that, I think expectations are also sky high on the boring economist to see what he can do as Prime Minister and how he's going to manage the Trump relationship.
Yeah, look, we are going to get to all the other parties, but I'm going to do a quick round here on Mark Carney. So, Kate, like the victory here for Mark Carney, while not a majority, for the Liberals, I mean, this is a comeback for the ages compared to where they were, you know, when we all went home for the holidays in December. What do you make of what he was able to do and the challenges he's got on his plate right now?
Yeah, I think he was able to seize and capture a real moment and a mood for the country. He outperformed his party in terms of his approval ratings, and, you know, kept hearing time and time again that people were maybe plugging their nose in terms of voting Liberal again, but they liked what Mark Carney had to offer. They thought that his CV fit the moment, it fit the times that we're in terms of a challenging economic time, and obviously I think he won the question around who's best to stand up to Donald Trump. I think that his plans are probably a little bit different heading into a minority parliament than they were a majority. You know, I think his intention was to try and govern a little bit more from the center. There are members of his caucus, and he'll need to work with the New Democrats in order to achieve some of what's on his agenda.
Can't work with the Conservatives?
Perhaps here and there. Capital gains changes would be a good start.
Yeah, energy corridor legislation.
Getting rid of the industrial carbon tax is another. But what I'm getting at is he might actually be increasingly pulled to the left. In order to pass his agenda, because there are still members of his caucus that were, you know, the Trudeau Liberal, the Stephen Guilbeaults of this world that will want to see real small p progressive action taken, and he'll need to make some deals either with the New Democrats or the Bloc to get his agenda passed, and that may be a little less moderate than maybe what he had intended should he have been given a majority. Yeah,
I mean, Brad, it's a fairly durable minority when you look at the math and you look at the fact that Mr. Poilievre lost a seat, you look at Jagmeet Singh lost a seat, and the NDP lost party status. And so in terms of the readiness and willingness perhaps of all the parliamentary participants to try to take him down quickly, I mean, what's your thoughts on the central banker's big win?
I agree with you that I believe that it will be durable. You know, 169 plus 7 is enough. So you only need one dance partner, either with the Bloc or with the New Democrats. So that is the case. And I love Kate's optimism that seven mighty New Democrats can pull the central banker to the left. I was making the case.
No, I think she thinks there's a bunch of socialists in the caucus too. So I don't think she's blaming.
A quick read of values is all I needed to know where Mark Carney stood.
No, I appreciate it. I'm an optimistic person myself, Kate. So I agree with you.
He's already spinning the power of the 7 dippers.
You saw what we did with 24. We got 9 million people dental care.
That's right.
Just see what we can do with 7. The country is testing us, David. That's really what the case is. No, I think it is durable. Only because I think that the times, and it's very true about Mr. Carney. If we were running 100 election models, Mr. Carney, with respect, would lose 99 of those. This was the one. You know, it's kind of like the polling where it's like 19 times out of 20. This happens to be that one time. The timing was so perfect for him. The issue set on the minds of enough non-conservatives was enough for him. Nobody wants to go back to the polls in the near term. Will he get a budget? Of course he'll get a budget. He'll get a throne speech, maybe 2. And we'll see from there. But that's enough. And I would submit to you that I think Mr. Carney will likely roll up his sleeves and say, if he looks at what he needs to do to get the support of the 7, and it's not going to take much, because I think there is an emerging consensus as to what needs to be done for making the economy resilient against the Trump tariff threats. I don't see him having difficulty getting through his first issues of confidence in the next year and at least a half. So
okay.
I think we're good.
Okay, Brad, I want to get Emily in here quick. And Emily, I have to interrupt you because Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is getting connected and she's going to join us. But your thoughts on Mark Carney, the victory and the challenge ahead, which may include finding a way to work with my next guest.
Yeah, Yes, I think in terms of finding ways to work with, I think with the strength of the Conservative loss / semi-victory, there's the issue of obviously the housing crisis, affordability crisis that had been identified by Pierre Poilievre. It's been really much pushed by Pierre Poilievre. I'm expecting as well with the size of the Conservative opposition, it's a good idea for Mark Carney to tackle those right away if he wants to build some sort of a consensus, because there are other issues who might not be as consensual, especially questions of energy, question of climate. And so if he tackles housing affordability, he gets some points to actually be dealing with the issues of Canadian unity later down the road. I would not necessarily say there's a lot of leftist energy in this House of Commons. However, because the Bloc Québécois will be a little bit more critical of some of the energy environment in policies that could also emerge coming from either the Conservatives or some parts of the Liberal caucus, you could definitely see a tug of war there, and it's going to be tricky on that file for Mark Carney to actually find a common ground. And so if he starts with what Canadians do agree with, I think it will help him build the credibility or at least the experience, politically speaking, to be able to deal with the trickier issue afterwards.
Yeah, I think Michelle, and I'm just waiting because I see the Premier, so I think we're going to go to the interview any second. I believe Mark Carney has a plan for how he wants to be Prime Minister. I don't know if Mark Carney has a plan for what kind of a parliamentarian he wants to be, right? And that is a big challenge in terms of going over the agenda.
He's never stepped foot in Parliament. You know, he obviously understands how it works notionally, but once you get into it, it's its own kind of beast. But what I would say is, there's a real consensus, it appears, on a lot of issues, whether it's the energy corridor or whether it's you know, getting our goods to market, or it's you know, streamlining the review process, that the Conservatives and the Liberals are pretty aligned on. And so I think that the Conservatives would be challenged to not support that kind of movement.
They're aligned on a conceptual level. We'll see if they get alignment on the details level. And we're going to check in with someone who's watching that one very closely, because a fourth straight Liberal win will inevitably reignite questions about how the West is represented in Ottawa. Premiers are advocating for a reset as this new federal government takes shape.
What I heard last night is a Prime Minister, and I'm hoping a Liberal Party that isn't giving up on Saskatchewan people and the role that Saskatchewan plays in the Confederation. But we'll find out.
What Prime Minister Carney has to do is unite the country. He has to reach out to our friends out west and tell them how he's going to build that pipeline, how he's going to have opportunities for people in the West.
I would just underline how critically important British Columbia is to the vision of the diversification of markets and the future of our economy in Canada, whether it's energy, critical minerals, access to markets. My hope and expectation is that they're going to work together to make this Parliament work for Canadians.
Meanwhile, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is congratulating Prime Minister Mark Carney on his win, but she's also warning him that the status quo can't continue, while describing the last Liberal government as hostile. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith joins me now. Premier, it's good to see you. It's been a while. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, David. Nice to be here.
So you congratulated Mark Carney, but it came with that warning, you know, vowing that you would push back against any future hostile acts from Ottawa. I mean, what does that say about the starting point of your relationship with him now that he's gotten an electoral mandate of his own?
Well, we had to make sure that it was pretty clear the things I put on the table when I met with him are the same today, now that he's won the election. And it has been a little unclear about what policies he's prepared to move on. I think what we can take from this result, with more than 300 people for voting for one of the two centrist parties, that there's a huge appetite for us to be an energy superpower, to build corridors, to get our products to market. And you heard it just among the premiers. Didn't matter what political stripe it was. I think there's been a foundational change in the aspiration that each province has. And so I hope he captures that and is able to move forward with some of the changes he needs to make in order to turn that into a reality.
He's increased the appeal of the Liberal brand in Alberta and in Saskatchewan. 28% of the vote in Alberta, 26, I believe, in Saskatchewan, and seats in Saskatchewan for the first time in the decade, one seat at any rate. I mean, do you think that tells you something about Albertans embracing this more centrist approach of Mark Carney, for example?
Well, 65% of Albertans and 65% of Saskatchewan residents voted for the Conservatives. So they wanted the Conservative vision. I think the Conservatives have more credibility when they talk about energy development. And I think we need to be perfectly frank. It was a major pivot on the part of the Liberals to launch their campaign by ending the carbon tax, which has been one of the policies that has not only exacerbated the differences between our regions, but has also been a huge problem from an affordability point of view. So I think that I hope what the Prime Minister takes away from this election is that the fringe parties got pummeled. The NDP barely exist. The Greens lost a seat and should not have an outstated influence on his government, and the Bloc Québécois lost ground as well. What people want is an aspirational government that is going to get things done, that is going to open up new markets so that we're not overly reliant on the United States. And so to think that the old Liberal NDP alliance that crushes the aspirations of Alberta and Saskatchewan is going to work on a go forward, I hope he is not of that view. I think that there's a different pathway, and I hope he takes it.
But he has certainly signaled, Premier, that he says he's a pragmatist. He wants to find ways to move forward. He wants to still pursue a climate agenda, but he says he's not completely beholden to hard and artificial caps, for example, with the emissions cap, which I know is still in the consultation process, and I know you fundamentally disagree with it. My understanding of the Prime Minister's view is that he believes in it as a policy instrument, but not necessarily with the rigidity of the previous Liberal leadership team. A lot of talk about energy corridors. There seems to be alignment at the First Minister's table. Are you not in any way more optimistic that your natural resources can find easier paths to market and you can get better cooperation with the federal government than you've had in the last 9 years?
Well, I always live in hope. But you saw that the Bloc Québécois' first move is to say they'd partner with Mark Carney as long as he didn't build pipelines. And so that's what I'm signaling is that may result in some kind of stability to put a part of his agenda through, but it's not good for the country. I think what's good for the country is to listen to what the premiers have all said, to listen to what the people of Canada have said. And there's an unprecedented opportunity for us right now to build those new pipelines so that we have market access to the east, to build north so that we can potentially not only protect our Arctic, but also find a new route over to Europe. And yeah, we should be talking about building to the east so that our friends in Ontario and Quebec are not overly reliant on American supply of oil and gas for their needs. So I do hope that because there were a lot of things said during a campaign. I do hope that those are the messages that have gotten through, because I think if that is the case, we will all prosper. We will all benefit from that. Sadly, though, we have seen with his predecessors, many of the cabinet ministers who were at the table then are going to be at the table now. They had overly aggressive targets that were unachievable. If you try to set an emissions reduction target with a 2030 timeframe, that's only 5 years from now. The only way to achieve it is to do less, is to shut in your production. I've always advocated for a much longer time horizon, and we'll just see how pragmatic the Prime Minister is if we can find some alignment.
Right. Well, it certainly sounds like what Donald Trump has done has changed the perspective of a lot of people in the Liberal government, right? And Mark Carney has indicated that has influenced his thinking, and he wants to be pragmatic on it. So we'll see where it goes. And I know you mentioned Mr. Blanchet, and while he is an important voice in Quebec, he does not hold actual political power in Quebec. Mr. Legault has also expressed an openness, an increased openness to consider these things. So you're going to have a challenge with Quebec no matter who is in the Prime Minister's office, even if Mr. Poilievre won, because social license there is harder to achieve when it comes to an oil and gas pipeline. So, I mean, is it really Mr. Blanchet at 22 seats with Mark Carney only needing 3 votes in a parliament like this to get any kind of energy corridor legislation passed? Is the Bloc really an obstacle here if the Premier of Quebec is willing to talk to the Prime Minister of Canada and the Premier of Alberta and see if there's a compromise?
I just hope that he doesn't create an unholy alliance with any of the political parties that are opposed to building out economic corridors. And I think that the NDP has staked out certain ground, as have the Greens and as have the Bloc. And so I don't know how he's going to run Parliament. Sometimes there are formal coalitions. Sometimes there's just agreement on votes on a issue-by-issue basis. This would probably be the time right now to see all of the areas that we can find consensus on and move forward. And I make the argument, I was just out in Quebec recently. I want to do more business with Quebec. I was meeting with business leaders to find out how we might be able to buy more from Quebec and how Quebec might be able to buy more from us. Because I think that that's another conversation that has opened up. Let's find new markets. Let's find more ways to trade with each other. And let's hope that this spirit of cooperation extends into this new parliament.
Well, you say you want to do more business with Quebec, but as a final point, there's a lot of suspicion that you might want to be a little bit more like Quebec. And when people like Preston Manning were talking about a Liberal win, maybe exacerbating the idea of Alberta separatism, I just wonder what your thoughts are on that. I mean, is this something you would forcefully push back against as the First Minister of Alberta, the notion that because the national election didn't go the way a lot of people in your province wanted, that it becomes a cause for separation?
Well, I have always said that I support Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada, and I think that is the viewpoint of many of the premiers, is that they want the Constitution to be respected. They want to be able to have local decision making. They want the environmental process to be at the provincial level. So I'm not alone in that. We have a process in our province where you have citizen-initiated referenda. If you have a certain number of signatures on a petition, issues can be put forward. If there is an appetite for that kind of conversation, that would be the avenue for it. But it's not something that our government would be putting forward. I believe that we've got to try to be on Team Canada, but my view has always been that Team Canada has to show that they're on Team Alberta too. And I think this is an opportunity for us to do that reset. I'm open-minded about it. I'm going to be working on that for the next number of months, but the proof will be in the action, not the talk.
Alberta Premier Daniel Smith, always appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay, that's Alberta Premier Daniel Smith. They're going to bring the power panel back now. Emily Nicola, Brad Levine, Michelle Cadario, and Kate Harrison. Michelle, I interrupted you there because we were talking a bit about Mr. Carney and his priorities. How does he deal with this? Now that he's got a mandate of his own and it's still in a minority parliament, do you think he can find common ground with Scott Moe and Daniel Smith in a meaningful way?
Well, I'm just going to note that, every premier that came out today were certainly first offered congratulations and then offered their list of what they want to have done and how much money they want to have. Yeah. And if there was anything predictable about this election cycle, it was that. And so, I go back to, I actually think that there's a real opportunity, because I think that the Conservatives would be in a really bad position to in any way be seen as blocking an energy corridor or blocking any kind of actual advancement in terms of getting things to market. I bristle a little bit because it was the Liberal government that actually got LNG across the line, and I remember that as part of the BC government and trying to deal with Stephen Harper when it didn't happen, and also built TMC. So I think that TMX. So I think that you have to, but there are more projects to come ahead, and to be on a positive tone today. I thought that, Premier Smith was probably the most cordial and the most cooperative. And so, hopefully that's a foot that's going to continue to step forward.
So Kate, I wonder about the two-way dynamic here, right? In that Scott Moe came out and said, we want to see change. And Daniel Smith came out and said, we want to see change. Mark Carney could very well point at them and say, I need to see some change too. Right? Because sometimes their rhetoric makes it harder to make the argument for some of these projects in central Canada, where there is a little bit more ambivalence on some of these energy projects.
Yeah, the relationship is a two-way relationship. Yep. I think that both Premier Smith and Premier Moe articulated well the moment that we're in. And again, we just talked about how Mark Carney rode a wave and a timing to capture victory. There really is an interesting timing right now to talk about advancing energy infrastructure in Canada, particularly with the context of being less reliant on the United States. If all parties want to come to the table, leave the ideology and the baggage behind in terms of why things did not progress before, perhaps figure out how they could now, I think that presents a really important opportunity for Canada and for political leaders to, again, put politics aside, because this is something we need to be doing to shore up our economy, make us less reliant, and give people that opportunity to grow economically. the politics have to be, as best possible, left out of this kind of decision.
Yeah, no, I think it's good to reset a lot of things. We just had a Conservative MP on the show. Brad, I want to get your thoughts on this, and then Emily's, and then I want to talk about what the heck is going to happen with Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, and with Jagmeet Singh. Well, we know it's happening with Jagmeet Singh, but with the NDP. Your thoughts on the challenge on the energy front for Mark Carney?
Yeah, to build on the point that I think we're in a special time right now where there seems to be a consensus within the country to do bigger things than we've been able to do in the recent past. It's kind of a conundrum that Mr. Carney's going to have to figure out here, because it's the threat of the Americans that he's going to try to dissuade and deal with. But it's also the threat of the Trump tariffs and 51st state and all that that's creating the conditions of unity. So if he solves the problem with Trump, maybe the conditions of unity go away. That's why I think he'll likely move quickly to seize the moment. We haven't been in this place in a long time, if ever, in the notion of interprovincial trade, of doing big projects, of working together as one economy as opposed to 13, to steal Mr. Carney's language. I think he's got to move quickly in order to seize it, because external issues have created the conditions. External conditions can also take them away.
Emily, your thoughts quickly.
I think there's a consensus in the country to move towards basically energetic sovereignty. I think that the dissensus is on how that looks like. For example, as far as Quebec is concerned, first of all, I was just seeing the polls. There's over 2/3 of Quebecers are really concerned about climate change. And so that regardless of who represents Quebec and provincially or federally, that's always going to be an issue in terms of even popular mobilization. But even in terms of energy independence from the U.S., then you're going to have, especially including François Legault, people moving to accelerating the development of Hydro-Quebec, building more dams, and accelerating the electrification of transportation as a way to build that energy sovereignty. And there is also a large part of Europe which is moving in that direction, especially since the start of the war with Ukraine and the issues with Russia. And the question is how long, because when people talk about accessibility to the market, the question is how big of a market is there in the East by the time you've built that pipelines. And so I think it's a very different conversation if you talk about going west, especially to the Asian markets. And so I think we need to have conversations that are, I will take Kate's language, not ideological and very pragmatic, but also realize that being pragmatic can not look like the ways in which everybody looks at this issue. From a Quebec standpoint, being pragmatic means building hydro. And so it's not being unreasonable as a viewpoint either. And we'll have to actually find common ground and be able to hear each other without saying that there is a side that is, basically being ideological, and the other one that's being pragmatic. Is more complex than this.
Okay, I want to go back to the big stories from the election, because you look at the bottom of the screen there. The Liberals with 169 seats, the Conservatives with 144. If you saw 144 Conservatives elected in a national election where they got 44% of the vote in Ontario, you would be correct to absolutely assume that Pierre Poilievre was one of them, but he is not. We spoke to Bruce Fanjoy at the top of the show. He defeated Pierre Poilievre, getting more than 50% of the vote in Carleton. So Pierre Poilievre wants to stay on as leader. What does he do for a seat in the House? Well, if he decides to run in a federal by-election, should one of his MPs step aside, it could take quite a bit of time before he's back in the House of Commons. First, he'd need to find a vacant seat or have someone create a vacant seat. And depending on how fast the government calls the by-election, it could take between 47 and 230 days after that seat is vacant for voters to head to the polls. That means even if one of Poilievre's MPs bows out so he can run in their place, he could still be without a seat in the House for almost 8 months. Kate, I don't know if Mark Carney would take that long. Should Pierre Poilievre find someone to step aside for him? Do you think he's going to find someone to step aside for him? His speech last night before he knew he had lost, that was a guy who wanted to stick around and stay on, but then he loses his seat. That changes the dynamic slightly. What's your sense of where he goes?
Yeah, well, taking a step back, there is a lot for the Conservatives to take away positively from last night's results. Obviously, losing the leader's seat is a dark, stormy cloud over top of all of that, but growing the popular vote, major inroads with what I would suggest is the new conservative voting coalition in this country. Blue collar workers, picking up all of those Windsor seats, inroads in the GTA, inroads with younger people. I think this is something that Conservatives should be really excited about. In terms of where we go from here, I think there is enormous support for Pierre Poilievre to stay on as leader. From Conservatives I speak to, he and the message that he brought forward is one that resonated with a huge number of Canadians. Didn't work this time, might work next time. And so I think, especially in a minority context, going through a disruptive leadership process is not the right call. And again, you saw the support for him on the ground. You saw the support for him during that initial leadership race. I think he's right to stay at the helm, and I suspect the caucus will be unified around that.
Do you think they'd let him stay at the helm if that 169 had ticked up to 172 today?
Hypothetical, hard to say. But again, I'm thinking about, I've been involved with the Conservative movement federally and in Ontario for 20 years. I look at the result tonight, of course, or last night, of course, with a bit of disappointment that we didn't get the job done. But with huge optimism and hope about where things are going. I think that the map has changed, and I think that the work needs to be now on making sure that that map stays sustainable.
Look, I was one of the people who did not believe that he would lose his riding in Carleton, but I was one of the dummies who didn't believe it. But Kate, you're right when you talk about how he's grown the movement, right? He's built what may even be a more durable coalition than what Mark Carney got last night in terms of delivering him to the minority status. Let's just show you some of the vote change. In some of the provinces, up by 7.5 in Newfoundland and Labrador, 5.6 in PEI. Up 9 points in Ontario. Now, look, the 8 points in Alberta, kind of empty calories in terms of seat count for the Conservatives. They did knock off a few incumbents, but up 8% in British Columbia. Emily, when you look at growth like that, and when you look at a seat count of 144, and when you look at Mark Carney being held to a minority, even though at the start of the year we thought it was going to be probably a super majority, to borrow a phrase from Jagmeet Singh. Is there an argument there for him to stay on, or does losing his seat and falling short, does that disqualify? What's your sense? How do you think it's going to play out with the Conservative movement?
I think, first of all, during the campaign itself, he, especially in French, put forward a different personality than the one that we got accustomed to at the House of Commons, trying to smile more, trying to attack less, especially in the last half of the campaign. The question is that something that is durable? Because there is an appetite, I think, for the country, in the country, for the House of Commons to actually function, and for people to be reaching across the aisle, and actually collaborate on policy agendas where there is common ground. And so, regardless of where Pierre Poilievre is, the question for him is that he could not, I think, go back to the House of Commons being the same kind of leader of the opposition that we had before, given how I don't think there's an appetite for this. I also think that Mark Carney could not be the same kind of prime minister that Justin Trudeau was. And obviously he's not the same man, so that's going to be a little bit easier for him. But for example, in terms of, we don't have the same kind of exit polls that we have in the US, but we do have a sense that it was also younger demographics that pushed the Conservatives to this level of a win.
Yeah.
And so people who are concerned about housing crisis, people who are concerned about affiliate, people who are concerned about having their families safe. This is something that really, you can be a Liberal and really care about those issues, obviously, and you should. And so those are things that Mark Carney should be reaching to the Conservatives about without having any sort of moral disagreement or crossing his line, or actually or not sounding like a Liberal, and really making sure that he tackles those issues quickly.
Right.
And that will also, I think, influence the fate of the Conservative movements moving forward. If the people are satisfied with the economy, then perhaps the Conservative movement will have to also readjust.
Brad, the Conservatives, though, they have a very recent tradition of one and done, right? And in the cases with, Mr. Scheer, there were real challenges with the way, he handled the debates and things that came out about use of party funds. With Aaron O'Toole, it was you ran one way for the leadership and pivoted to a softer version of conservatism, and it wasn't legitimate. There was no pivot from Mr. Poilievre. Like what he ran on the leadership on, that's who he was as Prime Minister. And even though he's failed here, it seems like that's his argument for sticking around, that I'm a true conservative and look what I've done, even if I didn't get the job done all the way this time. Do you think it will work?
Yes. Yes, it will. The caucus is behind him, particularly the new ones that just got elected under his banner, which are not insignificant. And all the areas of growth that I think the Conservative Party should be, can be proud of where they've done that. Not only like where they picked up new seats, but it's the votes and the cohort that come with those. Is there a new Conservative coalition, as Kate suggests? Perhaps. It's got to be more than one election to see if the trend holds. But it's a fair observation for sure. And this is part of a global conservative movement to attract predominantly working class men younger. It's something fascinating is going on within the country where older used to skew conservative, younger was more progressive. That's completely flipped now. The older cohorts are voting for Liberals and New Democrats, whereas the younger people are voting for the conservative movements. The issue here is, will Mr. Carney, does he benefit from having Poilievre as his spoil? The answer is yes. So yes, he could be a jerk and say, go and languish, and I'll take the maximum amount of time that the rules abide. But I would submit that something to consider is that he benefits, Mr. Carney does, from having Mr. Poilievre to say, this is the guy who's Trump-like, this is the guy, Mr. Sloganeering, this is the guy who helped bring us out of the ashes in the election, because a hell of a lot of Canadians who weren't going to vote Liberal at Christmas time certainly did, not just because of Carney's resume, but because they wanted to stop Poilievre. Poilievre being president helps Carney, so maybe Mr. Carney would consider moving that by-election up a little quicker.
Look, if we even get to a by-election, right? I mean, my assumption, Michelle, is that it will happen, right? That, Mr. Poilievre wants to get back into the House of Commons, and I think there's enough loyal and safe seats, whether it's in Alberta or in, some of the more rural parts of Ontario, who knows? But what's your sense on the dynamic now for Pierre Poilievre, having been 80% successful and 20%? Boy, those were big misses, on winning and winning a seat.
Yeah, no, politics can be cruel, and I think psychologically, though, the fact that the Liberals were kept to a minority, even though it's a very, very strong minority, does help him continue in his place. But I think that there's going to be an expectation, particularly as people reflect on, building for next time, but wanting a little bit of a Poilievre 2.0. A little more humble and perhaps a little more likable. Because let's remember, his negatives were super high, even versus Justin Trudeau.
He was a ballot drag in this election, right? Which is
this
remarkable.
Election, and even before the election under Justin Trudeau, he was running behind the party. So, I would expect that there will be a little bit of expectation on him in terms of staying on. But all that being said, they have an allegiance, the ones that were just elected, to him. And he certainly has the ambition to want it. Someone with that high of negatives, perhaps it's not a terrible thing to have a known quantity as the leader of the opposition to come back in instead of someone who might be nicer.
So here we are at the end of this election. Justin Trudeau is not a member of Parliament, Pierre Poilievre is not a member of Parliament, and Jagmeet Singh is not a member of Parliament. It's just stunning when you think about it. And Brad, there's no mystery about what Jagmeet Singh is going to do. He announced right away, I'm stepping down as leader and until you can find an interim replacement. And it's 7 seats right now on the board. I think those are all final. That's way down from the 24. That's 5 short of party status. The leader lost his seat. I mean, what happens with your party right now? Like, who is their core constituency? What is their reason for being at the end of this election in 2025?
Yeah, a couple of points, David. One is, I think that Mr. Singh should be proud of his accomplishments in the House of Commons. While his electoral evening last night was obviously far from desirable, he can hold his head up high and look back at his accomplishments. With 24 seats, he got 9 million people dental care. He got over 3 million people free diabetes and birth control prescription drugs. That's more than most politicians who lead much larger parties have ever done. So I wanted to make sure that was said, because that legacy will never be able to be taken away from him. As for the party, last night was a tremendous disappointment. There's no question about it. 7 seats and just over 1 million votes. There's no question that there's New Democrats right across this country, volunteers, people who've given up a tremendous amount of their time, former candidates, fantastic members of Parliament who lost their seats last night. What I can say is we've been here before. In 1993, in 1974, we faced similar challenges, but we always come back stronger. There is a core constituency in this country that is social democratic, and the party has a legacy of creating the things that make Canada great and what so many Canadians identify with, pensions, Medicare, to name just 2. So we will rise again. We will have a vigorous debate. And I think that debate is something that the party is going to benefit tremendously from. And that is the next leader. We're going to have this great debate, whether or not we want to be the conscience of Parliament or of the country, or whether or not we want to wage for government. And that, I think, is when you ask what is the heart and soul of the New Democratic Party? We are the government in British Columbia and Manitoba, the official opposition in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. The provinces and those that are active within the provinces will come up and be the foundations on which we build going forward. So while I'm disappointed, David, obviously last night was not what I wanted to see, but I am very optimistic about the future.
Okay, I just want to finish off a quick round and then we got to take a break. Emily, yes, they do well provincially in Western Canada. The NDP do. Those are largely binary fights, two-way fights. When you get up to the national level, it gets a little bit more complicated, and it's never quite gone there. So Mr. Singh, while is making the argument consequential on a policy front, on an electoral front, it was diminishment over a couple of elections, right? So where do you think the NDP goes from this point?
I think to understand this question, at least for me, what helps me is understand what's been going on in the U.S. in terms of the left between inside the Democrat Party, and also in France and in Germany and other elections across the West. What's been going on is that the right has been getting stronger, and that people have been building incredibly vaster coalitions to just be bigger than the right. And so I think that's what's been happening in Canada. And so the question of what's next for the NDP, I think I agree with that there's going to be a lot of soul searching that needs to be done in terms of what we do, what needs to be done strategically. But at the same time, there is also the question of, even if you have the best person ever, can Canadians feel like they can, quote unquote, afford to vote for that person if they risk a conservative majority and they don't want that as somebody who's very progressive? And so the question becomes a question of where are the rights, basically plural, in the Western world, and how do they win, and how the left wins. And I think if we have the conversation at that level, we're going to be able to take the Canadian political conversation in a different direction. But if we're only just looking internally at what Canada's been doing historically, what's the roots of the NDP, I think there's a broader point that needs to be explored in terms of the rise of the right in the West in general, and the ways in which they're drawing different coalitions, and how the left has been losing in the West in general, and why that is. And that helps as well, perhaps, bruise a little bit less egos, because we realize that we're part of a broader ecosystem there.
Okay. Michelle, I mean, Brad's point that this happened before in '93 and they came back, that could be true. It could also be that this is the beginning of a permanent realignment into a two-party system where the percentages they lost in southwestern Ontario to the Conservatives stay there, and the Liberals become the vehicle for stopping the Conservatives if you're a progressive voter, which is how this election played out.
Yeah, I certainly think that in the near term that the jury's still out. I think that a lot is going to depend on just the interplay actually between the Liberals and the Conservatives over the next couple of years. Does it become such rancour in the House of Commons again, where it's such fighting and there's just an obvious kind of schism that just doesn't seem to be able to be overcome? Or are there some different points where the two parties are actually working together, and kind of that centrist view that most Canadians, I would say, actually fall under? And does that give some room for the very left to actually expand a little bit when they're not so under threat? And so I think jury's out, but it's going to be a long road back, I think.
Kate, last
Yeah,
final
I
thoughts to you.
think Brad articulated the challenge and the opportunity well for the NDP. What I would say is we've just seen the consequence of the New Democrats backing the Liberals for a long period of time and not drawing contrast with the governing party, and that was an abysmal failure on the part of the NDP. So from my perspective, they need to look at how they will create that contrast and alternative early on. They need to be thinking about that when they go to select their leader as well, because if given the chance, people on the progressive side, if they are looking at two versions of the same thing, will just vote Liberal. So the New Democrats need to find out where they occupy their space in this conversation, and I think that they need to do it not by saddling up to the Liberal Party for the next 3.5, 4 years.
You know, people have been saying to me for weeks now, just wait till the election is over, you'll see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to have a transition, we're going to have a cabinet swearing in, we're going to have a throne speech. There's no budget in this country, folks. Parliament's got to come back. So it's going to stay busy. So we'll talk about that on future Tuesdays. Michelle Cadario, Kate Harrison, Brad Levine, and Emily Nicola at the Power Panel. Thanks so much, gang, for being here. Still lots more to come on this edition of Power and Politics the day after the election. Could the Conservatives have done something differently to overcome the Liberals in this race? Up next, we've got former Conservative Cabinet Minister and Leader Peter MacKay and former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, David McLaughlin. One thing that tipped the scales for the Liberals, the NDP's collapse. Still ahead, we'll speak to NDP National Director Anne McGrath about the party's future. And the Power Rankings panel is here to talk about the big winners, losers, and surprises in these election results. For the first time in nearly a century, two parties have won more than 40% of the vote in a Canadian election. The Conservatives walked away with 41.4% of the vote last night, an 8% increase since the last vote. You can see there they are up in every region, including 9 points in Ontario. All of that led to the Conservatives gaining 16 seats across the country, 12 of them in Ontario, including in Liberal strongholds in the 905 and places like Brampton West, where Conservative Amarjeet Gill beat out Liberal incumbent and Health Minister Kamal Khera, who had held that seat since 2015. Now, despite those gains, Conservatives lost arguably the most important seat in this election and the most surprising result of the night. Pierre Poilievre, their leader, he was behind Bruce Fanjoy all night, the Liberal who eventually won that seat, and was not able to make a comeback by morning.
To the millions of people who voted for the Conservative Party and put their hopes and dreams in our vision, thank you. It will be an honor to continue to fight for you. You know that change is needed, but change is hard to come by. It takes time. It takes work. And that's why we have to learn the lessons of tonight so that we can have an even better result the next time the Canadians decide the future for the country.
I'm joined now by David McLaughlin, former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, and by Peter MacKay, the former Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party. Gentlemen, it's good to see you both on the day after the election. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
Peter MacKay, let's start with you, and let's start with Pierre Poilievre. I mean, vote share up, seats up, leader down. Where does this leave Pierre Poilievre the day after the election?
Well, I think a period of reflection is in order, but as you pointed out at the beginning, I was surprised like everybody else. I'd heard the rumors. I think there was a Globe story that he was in trouble in his own riding and they were sending people in. But that was by far the biggest shock of the night amongst many topsy-turvy outcomes here and there. Disappointed, obviously, with the outcome in Atlantic Canada. But look, that's the nature of the game. It's like professional prize fighting. Sometimes someone gets knocked out, and sometimes it goes the distance. This was a short snapper of an election, and now I think the Conservative Party, in spite of the wins and the gains that you pointed out, are going to have to reflect not only on this election, but where they go from here. They will need a leader in the House. That probably is job one.
Right, David, a short snapper of an election, but an election they called for multiple years and seemingly had unlimited cash in the run-up to get ready for, and yet they had some challenges throughout this. I mean, you know, he gave a speech to suggest he wants to stay on. I think it would be reasonably easy to find someone to step aside for him so he could run the by-election. Do you think that's the right move for the Conservatives after what happened?
Yeah, I think he should be given another chance, or at least a chance to make his case for another chance. I mean, as Peter says, you know, the party does need a bit of reflection to try to understand why an election that was theirs to lose, they lost. I mean, you know, they really should have won this election, all things being equal. Things kind of got away from them. They were unable to kind of meet the zeitgeist of the moment, which was Trump and tariffs, and sort of reposition themselves. My sense of the campaign was that it was very much a playbook that they wanted to run and win as their kind of Conservatives, very populist, a little more to the right of center. They wanted to win on their own terms. The trouble is, it's the voters that get to determine the terms, right? And so they were unable to really pivot, soften their image a bit, reach out to those, you might call time for change liberals, that probably peel away some of those, what we would say, soft liberals back home, right, Peter, in Atlantic Canada, and bring them over. They were unable to do that, and so we get the results that we have. And of course, Mr. Poilievre losing his own seat, it's kind of a topper on it because it reinforces that Mr. Poilievre was, for many voters, that barrier still holding them back from actually, you know, voting blue in the end.
Okay, I got to interrupt for 1 second. For breaking news, it is the final elected seat in the 2025 election, and it is a Conservative seat. Mark Dalton has held Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge. This was one of the seats on the long list of 11 seats that had this very narrow political goat path to 172 for the Liberals, and that path got washed out by votes for the Bloc Québécois, the Conservative Party of Canada, and for the NDP. So congratulations to Mark Dalton, a significant lead there. Sorry, what was that, Tyler? projected elected there. Yes, so that is the final. I think that's the final one. That is riding number 343 of 343. So Peter MacKay, just on that, a second chance for Pierre Poilievre. There was this rigidity, though, this unwillingness to pivot. His personal popularities became a drag on the party overall. And, you know, Scott Aitchison was on the show earlier today talking about, with women in particular, it became a challenge. So those are not insignificant things. So how do you think that factors in the decision the party would make here and your own assessment of whether Pierre Poilievre should be allowed another crack at this?
Well, my own view is that Pierre Poilievre does deserve a second chance, and the party will, of course, ultimately determine that, and he will make his own decision, you know, which is a very personal one. It takes an incredible toll. I would suggest, you know, less than 24 hours when we're still seeing people being elected is probably not the best time to make the most informed decision. You know, David made some very astute comments, and the word that the Conservative Party obviously wrapped much of their campaign around was change. Unfortunately, for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, Mr. Carney very cleverly and very adeptly became the agent of change and sort of assumed that position. Whether he deserved that mantle or not, given that he was around the party for 5 years and has the same people who were around the party for 10 years and the same cabinet, the same policies, time will tell. The other factors, of course, you mentioned that Mr. Poilievre had no control over. You know, the insertion of Mr. Trump at the very beginning, the middle, and the very end of this campaign made it extremely tough. Mr. Carney held himself out as the Trump whisperer. And, you know, even the phone call, it turned out to be a bit of a half-truth. You know, that it was a very cordial call and they were going to talk after the election. Well, that part might have been true, but there was also talk of the 51st state. Just as sort of the tax havens, Brookfield, all of that was sort of half-truths. And so now we face still a great deal of uncertainty vis-a-vis the United States. I'm hopeful, and I think, David, you will agree, that Canadians have a modicum of hope that we'll get back to work. I heard you say a moment ago, we need to get Parliament in session, we need a budget. That's absolutely true. This has been a torturous and vulnerable period for our country by virtue of a lot of the political machinations, including this election. Not that that's a machination, but we need to get people back to work, back in position, and prepared to take on a very uncertain and unpredictable U.S. administration.
Getting people back to work and getting it working again, that's going to require a whole different change in how the Conservatives have approached Parliament. I mean, you saw that story in the Toronto Star, I'm sure, their playbook on how to make committees hell and make them a total mess and just make Parliament a dysfunctional social media clip machine. Yeah. If this Parliament comes back with Trump hanging over it and they continue with that, you know, I'm not sure what it says, but I mean...
It's a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, look, they couldn't control how Donald Trump intruded into the election, but they could control how they responded to it.
Absolutely.
And they chose not to really do it early. You know, they wanted to stick with the plan to beat Justin Trudeau with Joe Biden.
Yeah. And then they tried to pivot later on.
Yeah.
You know, there's an old saying in politics: you can't fatten the pig on market day.
Yeah.
You got to, you got to get yourself ready before you sell the pork on market day. And so they were late to that party, and I think they should learn from that. Look ahead as to where this dynamic is going. Canadians elected a minority parliament, but they do want stability overall in the country. And if dealing with Trump is job one, as Peter is correctly pointing out, then the Conservatives, it's incumbent upon them as the official opposition to try to find their way to do that. Hold the government accountable, try to be helpful, try to be serious about it, and I think voters will respond accordingly. If they overtly politicize this, then I think it's going to wear very badly on them. But they've also got some other challenges too, because it's not entirely in their for them to sort out. So Trump comes in from the outside. You have Danielle Smith today talking about a national unity crisis within the Conservative family. I know there was a lot of heat and that about Doug Ford in Ontario, but Doug Ford's not threatening in a way to have a secessionist kind of conversation. And Conservatives, ground zero for conservatism in Canada for the movement is Alberta and Saskatchewan. So if you have this very strong, assertive effective Alberta Premier talking, raising doubts about unity, etc., that's going to be a hard dynamic as well for the Conservatives.
It tethers the national leader where they can go.
It sure does. So, so Mr. Poilievre has got, and the Conservative Party, but they've got a number of constraints to, that they're going to have to work around. It's not entirely all in his sort of hands to make this, to determine the outcome. He's going to have to navigate this through. But I would agree with you wholeheartedly with what Peter's saying. Trump is job one, and how the Conservative Party responds to that will help determine whether or not people will start to look at them a bit differently afterwards.
So Peter, on that point, when Parliament does come back, look, we're going to have a new cabinet, we're going to have a throne speech, the country needs a budget, right? This all has to happen. Trump is overlaying on that the way he did on the election, and there's going to be trade talks and renegotiations and security arrangement conversations, like real grown-up stuff that needs to be dealt with in a grown-up way. If Parliament goes back to what it was last year, I mean, what's the value in that? So does the opposition need to be a little bit less oppositional? I'm not blaming them for all of it, but they drove most of it. What do you think they need to do?
Well, I think there was an obvious animosity that existed between Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau, just as I would say that Mr. Trump and Mr. Trudeau didn't exactly get along. But that's neither here nor there. Canadians expect that the government is going to get back to work and that there will be the role of His Majesty's official opposition. I still stumble over that.
Yep.
That will hold the government to account, but that means getting things done in the national interest. If it quickly turns into an acid splashing, axe throwing contest, Canadians are going to have very little tolerance for that, and everyone will pay a price. But the real issues do remain, and I would be quick to point out this was obviously a lot of debate throughout the campaign. The affordability crisis is still there. We still have rampant crime on the streets of some of our biggest cities. Drugs are still an issue. We still, of course, are very concerned about interest rates and joblessness and immigration. These are all very substantive issues that this Parliament is seized with. As for what Pierre Poilievre can do, there's a little bit of house cleaning. I mean, that's more of an internal political discussion that has to take place. They will do the inevitable post-mortem on the campaign itself. But, I think there are some questions that have to be answered by the people who were in charge and the preparedness of the campaign. I'm not going to go so far as to describe it the way that Corey Teneycke and others did, but when you're calling for a campaign, banging on about it, as you said, David, for 2 years, and you're 100 candidates short, when the writ drops, that is a problem.
Yeah, some questions to be answered, David, but only 4 and no follow-ups. That's one thing they may want to reconsider. But just with the if we go back to theatrics in the House, just as a final point, politically, whatever you can do that. The country right now needs a government that can function free of parliamentary noise, at least on the big files with the U.S. right now. Not that they shouldn't be held accountable for it, but it should be proper accountability as opposed to dysfunctional accountability, it seems.
Absolutely. But it's also up to Mr. Carney, as our Prime Minister, to set an agenda that actually Parliament can work with. I mean, he's the first one to set the tone, the throne speech, how they react to this stuff. If there is a kind of an arrogance, the Liberal DNA is arrogance, the Conservative DNA is meanness, right? These are sometimes these two things that come out. But if the traditional Liberal arrogance sort of asserts itself, then Conservatives as opposition, others will react to that. So it's up to Mr. Carney and his new government to set the tone there and to set out an agenda to actually deal with some of these things. As Peter says, it's a big agenda. He's going to have to figure out, pick and choose there, what he's going to move on first. And that will help determine whether or not Parliament is actually functioning. But again, Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives, they should read the room. Absolutely, the country, voters want the country to work. 2 years, perhaps, get through this Trump thing, and then we can be back to politics.
You're seeing some interesting signals at the First Minister's table, because it's been very collaborative and there's been movement and productive, and that maybe is a sign for what we might see in Parliament. We'll check in with you once we get some more clues of where that's going. Peter MacKay, David McLaughlin, always good to speak with you both. Thanks for being here today. All right, so some questions for the Conservatives, but this election, it has left the NDP on life support.
We may lose sometimes, and those losses hurt, it's tough. But we are only defeated if we stop fighting. We're only defeated when we believe that those that tell us that we can never dream of a better Canada.
Reduced to just 7 seats, Jagmeet Singh is stepping down as NDP leader. Can the party be revived under someone new? The NDP's National Director, Emma Grath, is coming up next. The NDP was handed a pretty massive loss by voters last night. First, there was a large drop in their vote share across the country. You can see that everywhere that they had double digits, they were down by double digits, and it was just a straight loss across the board. And this resulted in the NDP dropping the number of MPs they were sending to Ottawa by 17. And now only seven NDP candidates have been elected. These NDP losses led to Conservative gains in some parts of the country, such as the Southern Ontario riding of London Fanshawe, where NDP incumbent Lindsay Matheson is projected to come in third, which is a surprising result. But in other ridings, a drop in NDP support benefited the Liberals, including in NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's own riding, where he is projected to finish behind both the Liberal and the Conservative candidates, prompting Singh to make this announcement about his future.
I've worked really hard to be worthy of this trust, to live up to the legacy of our movement. Hold on a sec here, guys. Thank you. One more sec. Tonight, I've been informed our party leader that I'll be stepping down as party leader as soon as an interim leader can be appointed.
Okay, here to talk about what's next for the NDP is Anne McGrath, campaign spokesperson for the federal New Democrats. Anne, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here on a difficult day after a long campaign.
Thanks, David.
There's this emotional moment for Jagmeet Singh, but done with good humor and good character, which was what we saw kind of down the stretch run. When did it become clear it was going to be this kind of result for the party?
Well, I think we were hopeful till the very bitter end that it was going to be better than the most dire predictions, and actually, you know, I think it did surpass some of the most dire predictions, but it's definitely a devastating loss. And I think that I was holding out hope for a little bit more than 7. I was holding out hope for official party status, which would have still been a loss in many ways, because that's still only 12 seats. But you know, as the night went on, like early in the evening for sure, it became clear that that things were not going to go very well for us.
How quickly will it take, just as a bit of mechanics, for the party to settle on an interim leader? Because, you know, Mr. Singh without a seat and young family and the revelations about the security threats against him, I would imagine he'd like to get a bit more of his life back than he's had as a national leader. How quickly is that going to move?
Yeah, I think we'll want to move very quickly on that. The interim leader will be is a decision of caucus, and so they will probably want to have a caucus meeting fairly quickly. There's a lot of there are a lot of things to do in Parliament, just like to get things sorted out, you know, offices and staffing and all of those kinds of things. But they'll want to probably meet fairly quickly and decide on an interim leader. And then it's the party that actually makes the decisions about the permanent leadership, and you know when that will be, what the rules will be for participating in that, how many debates there will be, what the entrance fee will be. All of that kind of stuff is a decision of federal council.
You know, I was speaking with Brad Levine about this earlier in the show, and you know, like you, a veteran of the party, and he was saying that, you know, back in '93, similar sort of outcome, and you build back from there. I mean, I don't know if past is always prologue, because things do change in the political world. I mean, where does this leave the New Democrats just on the national level? Because in the binary battles, you know, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, they do well in government or in opposition. On the national level, it gets more complicated, right? So what is the sort of the choice the New Democrats need to face as a federal party coming out of this election?
Well, it is true that we have been through something like this before. In 1993, we did lose official party status, but I will tell you that there is, you know, what Jagmeet talked about last night in his speech. He talked about defiant optimism, and I think that is a characteristic of New Democrats. I mean, I will tell you that in 1993, I voted for us when we were at 6% nationally in the polls, and we lost official party status, and you know, and I was living in Calgary at the time. So, you know, I think, and we did rebuild. We fought hard in that parliament under difficult circumstances. We had a Liberal government that made some very significant cuts to things. That was when they cut the housing program. It was when they made major cuts to health and social transfers, to the transfers to the provinces. It was when they started making the changes to the EI program that have changed it to the point that most workers don't even qualify for it anymore. And if you do qualify, you can't live on it. So a lot of really bad things happened with a majority Liberal government and the NDP without official party status. But we did fight, and I think that we're going to be in a similar position. I think we're going to keep fighting. We know what our values are, what our principles are. We also know that a lot of NDP voters voted for the Liberals, and they didn't vote for the Liberals out of a sense of joy or optimism or any of that. And they told us that. They told us that in research, in opinion surveys.
But a lot of them voted for the Conservatives too, Anne, right? Like Brian Massey came third, and that's not because all the vote went Liberal, right? Some of it, like in southwestern Ontario in particular, the seats all went blue. So there is something happening. And back in '93, I mean, the focus was on deeper economic integration with the United States. I don't think that's going to be the focus for the next couple of years. So that sort of changes the calibration of voters on a national level, does it not?
Yeah, we are going to have to evaluate like where all the votes went, but we certainly heard a lot from voters who felt like they had to vote Liberal, they had to vote for Mark Carney because of the threat from the Trump administration. They were very concerned about that, and they said that they didn't want to do it, but they felt like they had to. And I think that that's important to keep in mind. And we'll have to figure out what happened also with NDP voters who voted Conservative. Although that has been a dynamic in the past in our Canadian politics. You know, we often talk about those blue-orange seats where there are people in many ridings who will never vote Liberal and they will never vote Conservative. So that is, you know, there are people who say I can never vote Liberal, and so they vote NDP. Right. Same thing with, you know, so that does happen for sure.
I think though the Conservatives, of the 17 seats that you lost, I think the Conservatives won 10 of them, if I've got my math correct, and I think the Liberals took 7. But the Conservatives benefited far more from this than I think the conventional wisdom was in the way the strategic vote or whatever the vote splits happened. I mean, they have been going after sort of that trade unionist, working class voter in a very aggressive way. I mean, does the party need to sort of pick a lane between that sort of working class trade unionist focus and the sort of urban progressive focus, which are I'm oversimplifying a bit, but the kind of the two halves of the party to a degree?
Yeah, we're going to have to evaluate what happened in those ridings. It is also possible that New Democrat voters in those ridings may have voted Liberal, and that allowed the Conservatives to win.
Right.
You know, and that definitely is a dynamic in Canadian politics, not just in this campaign, but we've had that fight many times where people are so afraid of voting Conservative and so afraid and in this case they were afraid of voting Conservative and they were afraid of Donald Trump, and they were saying, because I'm so afraid of that, I'm going to vote Liberal in ridings where it made no sense, and that actually voting Liberal would get you a Conservative. Okay, so and just as a final point, I know you're going to sort out who the interim leader is going to be as a party, and the caucus will make that decision. For the permanent leader going forward, should that be someone from inside the caucus of 7, or is it better to have someone from outside who can maybe spend some time building it, broadening it, reassessing it without sort of the burden of having to lead a party without official party status in the House of Commons? Yeah, that will depend, obviously, on who the candidates are. We've had success with both those models. You know, we both Jack Layton and Jagmeet Singh did not have seats in Parliament when they became leaders. They got seats later, so that is something that Tommy Douglas didn't have a seat in Parliament and had to run in a by-election to get a seat in Parliament. So that's not that unusual, and there are advantages and disadvantages to that. I think over the long term, though, you probably need to have a seat in Parliament, even if you don't have it at the beginning of your leadership. You just have to be in there in the question period, you know, drilling the government, and I don't think you can really do it from outside Parliament. So I think whether they come from inside or outside, they at some point will have to get a seat in Parliament. I don't know, maybe Mark Carney gave everyone a new model, become Prime Minister before you get elected. You know, it seemed to work for him this year. That was a very everything about this is weird. Politics have been wild, yeah. Yeah, I know. You know, it has been an abnormal election. Emma Grath, campaign spokesperson for the Democrats. Always appreciate your time. Thanks for being here today. Thank you. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but the Power Rankings panel is here to talk about the key moments from last night's results.
Vive le Canada. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Canada. Merci beaucoup, Canada.
It's been the honor of my life to represent the people of Burnaby Central. Tonight they chose, thank you.
All right, what caught their attention as the results came in? You can find out. You got to come back after this break.
no matter where you live, no matter what language you speak, no matter how you voted, I will always do my best to represent everyone who calls Canada home.
To the millions of people who voted for the Conservative Party and put their hopes and dreams in our vision, thank you.
Tonight and every night, all of us here, we're on Team Canada. We want Canada to thrive, and we're going to continue to fight for Canada.
Power is in the hands of those who vote, and we've got to respect that, never take anything for granted.
Welcome back to Power and Politics. It's time for our daily power rankings on the day after Election Day. Here with me today, Ginny Roth is a former Conservative campaign strategist. Cheryl Oates was the Director of Communications for former Alberta NDP Premier Rachel Notley. And here with me, Jonathan Kalis, who was Quebec advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It's good to see you all. I think we're all a little bit tired at the end of this election. I know I am. I'm feeling every minute of my years. Jonathan, let's start with you. I mean, 169 to 144 to 22, 7 and 1. What's your top line takeaway from this election outcome?
Mark Carney came out of, maybe not nowhere, but certainly politically out of nowhere. At the beginning of the year, Justin Trudeau was still Prime Minister. We're not even through 4 months of the year. Mark Carney ran for leader, won with 85% of the vote. He then started an election campaign, made some mistakes because he's new at this, but was able to convince Canadians from across the country, grow the seat count, grow the vote count for Liberals, and win the election. And become Prime Minister not for 9 days leading into the campaign, but become Prime Minister for, I don't know how long. It's a minority government, but I think it's going to last for a little while. So, you know, he's won the election. And I think that sort of got lost a little bit in all of this. We've talked about Jagmeet Singh resigned, and we talked about Pierre Poilievre lost his own seat, and all of these dramas that have happened elsewhere.
It's been a lot of news, Jonathan.
You know, Mark Carney won the election.
He did.
And he is a neophyte at politics, and he connected with millions of Canadians who voted for him.
Yeah, it's really going to hurt his chances of ever becoming finance minister, because that's the job everyone expected he was going to get when he first started being discussed in politics. But Ginny, here it is, April 29th. Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, and Pierre Poilievre are not members of Parliament. It is just a crazy thing to think about when you look back at the way 2024 went. What's your high-level takeaway from this election outcome?
You know, I think Donald Trump convinced Canadians to delay the future, like to put off change, right? There still clearly is a very strong sentiment for change. There are millions and millions of Canadians who cast a ballot for change in the Conservatives. And they came close. I mean, they exceeded their popular vote number historically. They racked up a bunch more seats in really interesting places, but it wasn't enough. John was right. Mark Carney remains the Prime Minister, and he will form government. So now the question is why? Donald Trump obviously played a huge role. I think the consolidation of the left played a massive role. The NDP just were shockingly low. I think we all were looking at those NDP numbers as the results were first coming in, and they stayed low. And honestly, my takeaway as a Conservative was for the Conservatives to do that well in so many seats with the NDP doing that poorly was actually like, I had to pat us on the back a little bit. No, it's not enough. It's cold comfort, obviously. But there's going to be a lot of looking at each of these ridings one by one to figure out what really went.
Well, look, it looks like a lot of that NDP vote went Conservative, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Southwestern Ontario in particular and those places. But, Cheryl, Donald Trump makes about $400,000 a year from the U.S. taxpayer. The Liberals may have to declare that as a campaign expense with Elections Canada when this is over. What's your high-level takeaway here?
Yeah, I think every party comes away disappointed last night. The Liberals obviously looking for a majority government and then coming really close but falling short. And I agree, Jono, they won, but I think they were looking for a more solid mandate than what they got out of last night. The Conservatives, yes, a good result compared to where they thought they might finish last night, but it's not the government they had hoped for a year ago, and their leader now doesn't have a seat. And of course, for the NDP, a crushing result, 7 seats, falling short of party status, and the party leader stepping down. So for those 3 parties, I don't think anybody got what they wanted. I think the same could be said for the BQ, that obviously losing a number of seats in Quebec as well. So, we did a lot of work here. There was a lot of work that happened over this campaign. We ended up pretty close to where we started.
You know, it's funny, though, just how much the expectations changed for the Liberals over the course of the year. Like, you look at that scoreboard, you would have had the red team down next to the Bloc Québécois at around 22 seats, you know, had this not changed. So it just shows sort of the wild year it's been. And Cheryl, let's get to the issue you wanted to highlight today, and it's sort of just the way this whole election played out.
Yeah, I wanted to give an up to Canadian democracy because last night and this morning, we saw every single party leader graciously and fully accept the election result and agree to work together for the future of Canada. And that is not a given in this political climate. There are places in the world right now where there is growing division and growing polarization and growing denialism about election results. And Canada just didn't do that. And, you know, this is a national strength for us that we trust our democratic processes. It will also be a strength for us, a critical strength for us as we face the threats from the United States and take them on as a united country pushing for Canada's interests.
Yeah, and look, that's a good point, Jonathan. Like, you know, in terms of trust in institutions or respect for institutions, eroding fast in the U.S., eroding but less quickly here. There was some noise and nonsense during the election of bring a pen, not a pencil when you vote, because they're going to erase. Like, someone's going to sit down and do that with 20,000 ballots in a couple hours. But no one is, you know, denying that this is what it actually is.
It's not even a matter that they're not denying. You know, we had, what, 20 ridings that weren't finished the count last night when they stopped. No one sort of screamed bloody murder. No one was started with conspiracies.
No, advanced polls flipping big swings. It's just the way it is.
No, people thought, okay, that's normal. It's 3:30 in the morning. Maybe they should get a break so that they're clear-eyed when they restart counting. And we were all buggy-eyed, like, why aren't they finished? Oh, it's 2 o'clock. Is we're going to get it at 2:30? We were annoyed for 5 minutes, but like we got the results and we trusted them and we moved on. So we take that for granted. We really do. And it's so many countries, and not just these, you know, dictatorships all over the world. The United States, we watched it. We watched multiple elections now where they don't believe what's going on. And there are lawsuits and there's all kinds of questions. We just didn't have that here. And let's continue that. I really hope so.
Yeah, I was annoyed for longer than 5 minutes, Ginny, because I had to keep filling airtime going deep into the morning with a flight to catch back to Ottawa. But your thoughts on this? I mean, you know, not everybody liked the outcome, but nobody's complaining about the process.
Yeah, I think it's good. But I also, maybe I do take it for granted. I don't know. For me, it's like, this is maybe why we should not pro-clutch constantly about a few kooks on social media. Like, I think the impact of social media means that one or two voices with no followers get amplified in a way that they would just not if we didn't have social media, right? We'd never hear from these people. They would like be in their mom's basement, video gaming with their friends, maybe. And so, you know, I think we have a tendency to get like whipped up about that. And this is a real threat in other countries. It's just not in Canada, and that's great.
Yep, no, it's good to have strong guardrails and to call it out too. But yes, I agree with what you're saying, not to exaggerate things that aren't that meaningful. Ginny, you wanted to talk about something that is meaningful, and that's what we saw with the coalition that Pierre Poilievre is building, even if he did fall short.
That's right, and this is not just Poilievre. You know, I've been critical about Erin O'Toole, but I've got to give him some credit. He made some inroads that Poilievre and the Conservatives have subsequently built on with a whole new coalition of voters. We can talk about the practicalities of NDP Conservative switchers, but deeper than that, there's the Conservative voters are younger. They are more working class. They're more interested in change. They're actually weirdly more hopeful. They're more excited about the future, I think, because they need a different future in order to be successful, or that's how they feel anyway. They are more likely to be employed by a private institution or a private union than a public government or broader public sector. And this is not, you know, I saw last night, I think it was like an organization, got a bunch of high school students together and had them do like a fake election or a pseudo-election to see who they...
Yeah,
they
student vote. Yep.
They elected a conservative government. If you had told me when I was in high school that high school students would choose a conservative government and be more conservative than adult voters, I would be shocked. I mean, that's pretty wild, and I think there's a lot of room for optimism for the Conservatives in that, because it feels more future-oriented. It feels like you represent the future of the growing pools of voters in Canada, not the older voters who are a little bit more set in their ways, and who, yes, they show up in big numbers, and that's a big part of why the Liberals won. But I don't know if there's a strong future in that.
Cheryl, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. There's the Conservatives targeted younger working class voters, and it was really successful. They, you know, zoned in on things that young people are really worried about: housing, having good jobs, talking about their future. They did that exceptionally well. But I do think there is some trade-off to it. And you saw that when you saw, the Conservatives giving up wealthier, well-educated suburban ridings like the ridings around Ottawa, for example. And you saw that in the end of the Conservative campaign, where you saw them campaigning to, for example, white upper-class male boomer golfers, a demographic that you would think would be a solid demographic for the Conservatives, but because they've been really targeting those demographics like youth or, working class, there is some trade-off somewhere. And yes, it can be a coalition that you build, but you have to build that bridge to keep the voters that you had in the first place.
Yeah, Jono?
It's kind of weird because it's inconsistent within regions, sub-regions. It's going to take a lot of time to go through this, granular analysis to try to figure it out. Because, I look at Southwest Ontario, and even starting earlier in the evening when you were trying to do, can we extrapolate from Newfoundland and Labrador and through the Atlantic and what that's going to mean into Ontario. So you would have thought maybe, based on the pattern we were seeing, that Carleton would be a safe seat. And it wasn't. And that both of us had discussed it. We thought for sure, no, of course he's going to win that. And he lost that seat. I look in Quebec and Trois-Rivières and Beauport-les-Merleux, those two ridings were not even on anybody's board as being like real focuses. Yes, they were both three-way races, but it's going to take a lot of time, or not even 24 hours post, to try to really dig in, because then you're going to have to figure out how to micro-message to each of those subgroups all across the country that will have different reasons for having voted Conservative or Liberal, and how that after 3 or 4 years, what that'll mean post-Trump, So I think we're just getting started on what this all means.
Okay, we got about 3 minutes left in the show, and then they're finally, mercifully going to take me off the air. Jonathan, let's get to your pick for today.
I just think it's really interesting what happened in Quebec, and you have the best results for the Liberals in Quebec since Pierre Trudeau, 1980.
44 seats, right?
Okay, you have the best seats for a governing party since 1988 with Brian Mulroney. So what does that mean? I mean, since especially 93 and the creation of the Bloc, this is the first time you have a real strong Federalist voice there. Yes, the NDP, New Orange Wave, but I'm not sure that was all Federalist. What does that mean? You have an election in a year and a half in Quebec where the Parti Québécois is leading. But today, there was a huge brawl in public between the leader of the PQ and the leader of the Bloc. They were going after each other. It's wrong to talk about independence. They're imploding, and they're trying to figure out what this means for them. It's going to be interesting to watch over the next few years, but you're going to have a lot of Quebecers within the National Caucus. Yeah. What is that going to mean?
Yeah, 44 of the 169 Liberal seats, Jenny, are from Quebec. They delivered their quota of seats. It was Ontario that let them down. What's your thoughts on what Jonathan had to say there?
Yeah, I think that's right. Quebec is going to play a really, really important role in the government. I think you'll see Quebec cabinet ministers play a prominent role. And really, I worry a little bit as someone who wants to see pipelines built, who wants to see more national projects, who wants to see more national unity, about the kind of bulwark against that Quebec ministers will play. I don't mean that in a nefarious way, but they've got their interests that they want to serve, and
their constituencies.
And the people who elected them, exactly. The other thing that's interesting is the Conservatives in Quebec. Not a lot to write home about. They did okay. But where they did kind of well is really interesting. To Jono's point about we'll have to sort this all out in time. The Conservatives did oddly well in Montreal, at parts of Montreal that you would not expect. I think in part that's the Jewish vote. Yes. Maybe some other ethnic second, third generation Canadian type voters. And I think that's really interesting, and maybe some room to make gains in places you wouldn't expect in Quebec for Conservatives. And they'll have to look at that for next time.
Well, that could also be part of the phenomenon we saw in Peel region, including winning a seat in Brampton, second and third generation South Asians in particular, concerned about crime and affordability. That could have been a play there. Cheryl, your thoughts on Quebec and the election results?
Yeah, I think it's just really tough to push a separatist message right now. I mean, since before Donald Trump was inaugurated, Canadians have been rallying behind the Canadian flag and behind the country. And, language and cultural protection issues have just taken a back seat to protecting the nation. And that was true across the country, and that was true in Quebec as well. And even for those Quebecers who still dream of sovereignty as their top priority, they know that it's Canada as a country that they're talking about leaving and not the United States. So really rallying behind the country rather than talking about how to tear it apart, I think has become a priority for Canadians across the board, not just in Quebec.
Yeah, it has been a truly remarkable election right? When you sit back and look at it, like, you know, those seat counts, like Ginny, when we saw each other in Toronto yesterday, which feels like a month ago, I'm not going to lie. You know, the top line numbers wouldn't have surprised you, but like Pierre Poilievre losing his seat and all these things, like it is just a year of political outliers, one after another, after another, after another, and it's only April. All right, we got to leave it there. We're out of time. I want to thank you all for being here and throughout the campaign. And John, your voice just sounds like you're up celebrating a Liberal electoral victory last night. That's Jonathan Kalis. Yeah, he is. Ginny Roth and Cheryl Oates. Thank you all so much. I am David Cochran. Thank you all for watching Power and Politics. Thank you for watching the marathon election session last night. You've tuned in for all of that extensive election coverage. Hannah Mansing tonight is next on CBC News Network. I'm going to say goodbye for the day. Thank you for watching everything, and stay tuned for Ian and his team with more election coverage coming up right here on CBC News Network.